More Than Social podcast. I am super, super excited about the episode that you are just about to listen to. To give you a quick little sneak peek, Simona is joining us today. Who is Simona? Simona is the person who has helped me bring the More Than Social podcast to life. I met her a couple months ago. She was a podcast producer. I had this dream of starting my own podcast. I just really didn't have the time to really just get this all up and running and to the spot that I wanted it to be before we were able to actually launch. So I kind of took it as this opportunity when I met Simona to jump on it and say, hey, you came into my life at the perfect time and I need your help. So I had this idea. I had this dream. I had this goal. I knew kind of what I wanted this podcast to be all about. And essentially, I just told Simona, hey, this is what I want to do. And she took my idea and she ran with it. And that is the reason why you are listening to me today on the More Than Social podcast. So I've asked Simona to join us here today to talk all things about podcasts. What do you do to start a podcast? How do you actually start a podcast? What technology do you really need to start a podcast? Because when I started, I had no idea. I knew that I needed an audio recording. I knew that I had to put it on particular platforms like Spotify and Apple Podcasts, but that was all I knew. I didn't know anything else. So that's why I wanted her to come here today. I want her to be able to share with you, if you're curious about starting your own podcast, what it actually takes. So before further ado, let me introduce Simona. Hey, Simona, I am so excited to have you here. Welcome to the show that you helped put together.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for having me. I'm so excited to be on here with you, and I'm so honored to have been asked to have been a guest on the podcast.
How is that, by the way, being a guest on a podcast that you actually brought to life?
It's really interesting. I've actually done it a couple of times for my clients who have more of like business and marketing focused podcasts. And I absolutely love it. It's amazing to be able to bring like that side and like expertise and like talk about the launch and like what we did and how we did it. So I love it. I have such a good time. And like all of my clients essentially turn into friends. So it's kind of just like I get to have like girl time with my friends.
Well, I'm so happy that you're here. And honestly, I have a lot of questions that I want to ask you, especially just because we just went through all of this and this was a completely new experience for me. So I figured who's better to explain how to actually start your podcast than the girl who helped me bring my podcast to life. So before we jump in, I did just tell our listeners a little bit about who you are, how we got connected. But why don't you let us know, or let everyone who's listening know, a little bit about yourself, what you do, your background, and even how you got into podcasting in the first place.
Yeah, definitely. I always like to start with like a little story, and I won't go on for very long, but it kind of is like it explains the journey into how things can evolve and how you can get to where you want to go. So back in 2018, I found myself in like a really, really dark place. And I was like, Lisa, I hated everything about myself. I hated the way that I looked. I hated that I was like a gossipy person. I hated that I hated everything. I hated everything about myself. And I know hate is a strong word, but I truly felt that way. And so fast forward like a few months. So my now husband, then boyfriend, called me out and he's like, okay, you're so miserable. You need to do something about this. Like, I can't live like this anymore. And I was like, what? I was like, what did you just say? I was like, why? Like, how could you just say that? Anyways, I'm glad he did. I ended up going into therapy and I did a bunch of like self-discovery work. And in the process, I realized that all of the things that I was going through and experiencing was so common for so many people. And I was like, well, if I'm feeling this way, there has to be somebody else out there in the world that feels this way. And I really want to like help them. Like I want to help people feel less alone. So then I was like, okay, how do you bring all of your thoughts and all of your ideas to other people? And so I was like, okay, I'm going to start a podcast. So I started a podcast and that was in January 2019. So it's going on 3 years in 2022. It'll be 3 years that I've had the podcast, which is unbelievable. It's grown so much. But essentially from that place, then I got into coaching. And on the side, I was also doing podcast production through Fiverr, like the freelancing app, which was so random. And I got a bunch of clients. So most of my clients I've actually been working with for like 2 or 3 years now at this point, which is amazing. And it's just grown and it's expanded so much. And now it's turned into more of like an agency where we do podcast launches and full production for our clients from start to finish. social media strategy, marketing strategy, launch strategy, the whole shebang, the whole thing. But it started because I didn't feel like I was worthy of having anything in my life, and I chose to do something about it.
Oh, I love that. I love that. I mean, we always have those experiences where we are in our lowest point of life. Kudos to your husband for actually saying something, because a lot of people don't. So love that aspect. But the journey that, I mean, over the last 3 years that you've even gone through is incredible, to now, like me working with you, seeing how you actually have your agency set up, seeing how you're able to take that idea that someone has and turn it into this amazing podcast, obviously, that we're on right now. But for me, so I obviously had this dream of starting a podcast. I knew that I wanted to do it. I knew that it was something that it was kind of like that next step for me in the online world. I just, one, didn't have the time to focus on it. And two, I didn't have that push. So that's where you came in, where you kind of just, you were there. And I was like, oh, perfect. I needed someone to do this for me. Here you are. You seem like a cool girl. I think we're going to get along. Let's do this. So it was kind of this really quick turnover. It literally, as soon as I saw you, I was like, yep, we're doing it. But I really didn't know much about starting a podcast. I didn't really know what it took, besides the fact that you need an audio and you have to put it on Spotify or a podcast platform somewhere, shape, or form. Didn't know what to do. So for all of the listeners who may have a dream of starting their own podcast, or maybe just curious of what it even takes, what would you say someone needs to know before they even jump into starting their own podcast?
Oh, I love this question so much. And a million things come to mind, but I think the most important one out of all of them is why. Why are you starting a podcast? And be very clear about that why. Are you starting a podcast because, perhaps it's an extension of your business, it's the right next step, or you want to bring expertise to the table, you want to position yourself as a leader? Do you want to have 400,000 downloads, or do you just want to show up and educate people, right? Do you want to do it for fun? There's so many different reasons why people start podcasts. And I think it's so important that you get very clear on why you want to have it. Are you just doing it because everyone else is doing it? Because that's not going to give you enough of an anchor when things get really hard, right? When you're trying to produce your episodes, you're trying to record content, you're really busy with all your other projects, like that, just because you think you should, is not a strong enough why to anchor you down in those really hard moments, right? Like you need to really be able to think about what it is that you're bringing to the table every single day, every single time you sit down to record, right? I always like to say, Lisa, like podcasting is it really is one of the most intimate relationships that you could ever have with your listeners and your audience and your community, because people are literally choosing to take you and your voice and your potential guest and put them inside your ears and listen to what you're saying in moments where they need to decompress, de-stress. Maybe they're going for a walk, they're driving the kids, they're going to and from work, they want to learn. Like that is the most powerful relationship, when someone chooses your words to help get them through that moment, or chooses your words to help them learn something new, right? And so it's an honor, I think, when people hop on and listen to your podcast, because they don't have to.
Yeah, no, it's even like, so I listened to my own episodes, obviously, and I thought that was going to be super weird. But yesterday, the episode that just launched last Thursday, I listened to it and I was like, oh, I love it. I was like, I actually really like it.
I'm really good.
I mean, yeah, I was like, I love this. This is fun. It's something different. But yeah, like having that why behind you. I mean, with anything that you do in life, if you don't know why you're doing it, as soon as it gets hard, you're out. So it's keeping that why really close to you, which is amazing. And I think a lot of people with anything, like I just said, they need to really be clear with that why aspect. And I feel a lot of people just kind of jump into things and figure it out as they go. But that's one thing that you asked me was, why did I start this podcast? Why, like, what do I actually want out of it? There's a few different whys that I can go into on a different episode, but it's something that I know I'm trying to keep close to my heart. Even the episodes that we do shoot and do record, I keeping that why right in front of me. But another really cool thing that I've learned over this experience is the technology standpoint. So I said we need an audio and we need to put it somewhere. I didn't really pay attention to my mic. So we both have the Blue Yeti mics. Yours is obviously hanging upside down. Mine's just right in front of me. But it's like, even setting that up was a new experience for me. So for someone who may not have a clue of what equipment that they need, what would you recommend people start out with?
Ooh, 1,000%. So I love this question so much. People think that you need to have all this expensive stuff to start your podcast, and that's simply not the case. What you need is a mechanism to be able to record, a medium to do so, and essentially a place to edit your show and to host it. So if I were to give, and I'm going to create a download for this, and you know what, maybe I'll create a download for this, and then I'll send over the link so that your listeners can grab it. And it'll be just like my best like tips and tech that I think that people should take a look at. But essentially you need a mic, and I have a couple different recommendations. I like the Blue Yeti. If you know how to use it and you know how to set it up, the Blue Yeti is an amazing mic. I also really like the Shure mic, Shure. Those mics are amazing. They're expensive, but they're so good and the sound is so crisp. So important. Now, when you go and record, there's so many different recording platforms and systems. A lot of the times people use Zoom, which is fine, but the audio on Zoom isn't that great, and neither is the video unless you have like an external camera hooked up and an external mic, right? I prefer platforms like Zencaster, Riverside FM, and Squadcast, because those three are very good for capturing quality sound. I actually use on my podcast, and it's something that I've just set up for the new year, for 2022. It's new to me, but it's been around for a while. But it's a technology called OBS Studio, and it's actually meant for PC users, but there is a Mac version as well, and you have to add in all these plugins and stuff like that. But it is so cool, and it makes your sound so crisp. I love it so much. If anyone has questions about that, you can just reach out to me directly. So there's that. And then you also want to think about your hosting platform. So where are you going to host the podcast, right? That's the biggest question I see from so many people getting ready to launch a podcast. I'm in so many different Facebook groups, and all these people are wanting to launch their shows, launch their podcasts. And they're like, okay, but how do I get it on Apple? How do I get it on Spotify? Where do I need to have my platforms? What platforms do I need to be on, et cetera, et cetera. And so what I would say is you want to make sure you have your hosting platform. So there's platforms like Libsyn, Anchor, Buzzsprout. Those are probably the top three that I would recommend. But other than that, you have to get on those platforms, and then from there directly, then you're able to feed your show out into all of the different platforms. So you submit it through the back end to all those platforms, and then that's how you show up on those different podcast apps.
Amazing. Yeah, I had no idea that there was like one standardized place that you host everything, then it kind of just goes from there to different directions. So just quick little recap. The microphones, the one that we're using right now, both of us, is the Blue Yeti. We are recording this on Zencaster, which, by the way, guys, is kind of really cool. So me looking at Simona right now, she's kind of blurry, which what that means is it's actually keeping the quality on her end of the video. So when we actually download this after we're done here today, then the quality of the video and the sound is coming from both of our individual computers, which is interesting, which you pointed out is a big reason why we shouldn't be using specifically Zoom if we want to get that higher quality. Another thing just that I do have set up, and I believe you just got your new webcam set up, but I'm using a Logi webcam, which is making the video quality better.
I have the Logi Stream. Is that the same?
I don't know what one is. It is. I don't know. It's just Logi, and it sits on my computer. I don't know, but it's a webcam.
I love it. And the other thing that I just wanted to add in quickly, because if people are listening and they're not a podcaster and you don't want a podcast or anything like that, these tools are still really good for shooting video content for your courses, for your programs. Like, you want to think about the quality that you're putting out there, right? If you're going to do everything through Zoom, and you're going to charge $1,000 for it, think about the quality and what people are receiving. But anyways, I think you had a thought and I didn't mean to interrupt it.
No, it's okay. I was going to ask, so a lot of people, and I hear this on podcasts all the time, that people are hiding in their closet or they're hiding somewhere quiet so they get left alone. Maybe the dog's interrupting, whatever the case may be. Why do you feel like it's important to have both the video side of things and the audio?
Oh my goodness, for so many different reasons. And the first thing that you just make me laugh with that, because I was telling you before we started recording that my dog loves to interrupt my podcast interviews every single time. Every time. It's like without fail. He's like, he'll nap before and after, and then during, he's like, oh, let's play. Let me do all the squeakers. Like, let me just bother you. Anyways, so what I would say though, why it's so important to have the video and the audio for like a bunch of different reasons. So the video for your podcast, you can actually take and you can repurpose that and put that on YouTube. Another thing that I love to do, and one of the best ways right now to promote your podcast in general, is through video content on social media. That is what the platforms favor. That is what the platforms want. And so it's so important, even if you don't publish your video, record in video so that you can pull those sound bites and those snippets off of the video And so people can actually watch and see your interactions and that kind of thing. The audio is so key to have separate as well, because that's what people are going to listen to, right? Like that's what people are going to listen to ultimately through a podcast. So I think it's just good to have both, because you never know how you're going to want to repurpose an episode or content in the future. Another thing too that sometimes people do, and I actually do this on my podcast, interviews that I do with other people on their shows, I actually ask to repurpose it for my show as well. And what I do is I do like a shout out and I say, okay, this was featured on the More Than Social podcast. The links are in the show notes. Go and check it out. Give them a follow. This is what the show's about. And then you hear the conversation, right? Having that option for your guest as well, for them to put it on their YouTube channel, even if it's not coming from your native platform, it's still great exposure for you. And they don't have to take your content and put it on their platforms. I think it's great promo both ways. So I don't know if that answers the question, but those are my thoughts.
No, it does. Side note for me that I have different podcast episodes that I've been interviews on, and I never even thought to ask them for the content. So that's a really, really good tip. Another thing that you said that's important is the video content from a social media standpoint. Yes, when you're listening to an audio, you can hear a voice. You'll be able to hear my giggle. You'll be able to like get to know me a little bit. But when you see me, that makes your brand a little bit more humanized. So you're getting that connection piece on both ends of it. So if they're listening to the podcast, let's say while they're on a run, and then they happen to go on Instagram after while they're lying on the couch dying and trying to catch their breath, then they see your face. And then they kind of just piece everything together so they get a whole sense of who you are as a person, which obviously is extremely important in the online world, but even just to build those relationships, which is awesome. I do have a question, and something that we haven't talked too much about is the algorithm. So obviously with social media, the algorithm is crazy, and there's so much that we can talk about and learn and dissect. But from a podcast standpoint, how does that algorithm work?
There are so many different pieces to this. And I will start out by saying that just in general, the podcast stats are the most like hidden, hard to not hard to digest, hard to understand, and like hard to get your hands on, because it's so like it's not accurate. So for example, on your backend platform, I'm going to use arbitrary numbers. Maybe your episode gets 1,000 downloads through your hosting platform. You and we use Libsyn. I use Libsyn for all of my clients. I love that platform. So it's on Libsyn, you have 1,000 downloads, and then you go to like Spotify, for example, because Spotify, you can claim your podcast through there and you can see the data on the back end. You can do the same for Apple Podcasts. You can do the same for Google Podcasts. The problem is when you go in and you look at it on the back end, you see information that is just not accurate. So it'll say like you have 1,000 downloads on Libsyn, and then Apple will say you have one download with a 2-minute listen. And so like you just automatically know that those stats are not good. So I just wanted to throw that out there for anyone who is a podcaster, anyone who wants to podcast. For your stats, I just think it's so important, and I'm kind of beside your question, so I'm really sorry, but I just think that that's so important to just note that you have to like take those numbers arbitrarily. Now, when it comes to the algorithm itself, very interesting. The more downloads you get, the more you bump up in the charts. Now, in order to get downloads, you need people to listen, right? So what are you doing in terms of your marketing strategy and social media strategy? Totally different topic, but you want to pay attention to that as well, right? Now, the number of ratings you get will bump you up in the algorithm. The number of reviews don't necessarily have that much of an impact because it's not something that's readable from the bots because it's a search engine, right? So it's not readable. And so you want reviews because you want that social proof. You want to be able to take that content. You want to be able to put it online on social media. And it's like, hey, look, my podcast is actually good. People are actually enjoying it, And so there's that whole piece. But ratings is super, super important. The more ratings you have, the more you bump up. The more downloads you have, the more you bump up. And the charts are all over the place. So you can go up one day, down one day, up one day, down one day. But eventually, once you podcast for a while, then you start to see the data and you can see like, okay, this is typically where I am. For launch, it's actually really hard to get up in the charts. And I saw when we did your launch, you were actually ranking, which is hard because there are a lot of podcasts out there. There are a lot of podcasters and a lot of people producing really good content, right? So I think it's super important to keep that in mind too, that it's not as easy as people think it is to rank in the charts, and your content actually has to be valuable for people to want to listen to it, right? So there's that whole piece. And then I think the last thing that I would say on this too, in terms of the algorithm, on the back end, on your hosting platform, you want to make sure that you're using keywords and that you're tagging your episodes and you're tagging your actual channel overall with the right keywords. And so what I like to do is in the show settings, I like to go in and add keywords and tags that are relevant to the podcast or to the show. Like, so for you, it'd be like marketing, business, social media tips, social media growth, like just off the top of my head. And then that way, those are things that people are searching and are looking for. And then your episode comes up before other people.
Very cool. Yeah. And it kind of works very similar with social media. The more engagement that you're getting, the more people are going to see it. And then it just kind of snowballs from there. The charting aspect, just from our personal experience. So when we launched, I think we hit 7 in the charts. And I was like mind blown because I see Amy Porterfield and I see me and I'm like, oh my God, that's huge.
It's me.
Yeah. And then I think it dropped to like 20 and then it went up again, then like dropped down to 40. And like, it's kind of like all over the place, but it's really cool that you can see where you're landing in the different categories. So for example, this one was the marketing category for the Canadian market. And then there was something else for the Netherlands. Like it's really cool how they organize it. I like that aspect, but I'm also very competitive. So I'm like, oh, get me up, get me up, get me up. Oh, so everyone, if you're listening, rate and subscribe, please.
Exactly. At least have my numbers go up.
But it's fun. It's really fun to see that aspect, but definitely it's not something that I expected right off the bat. So kudos to you to help me get ranking in the charts right off the bat. Now,
it doesn't happen for everyone either, just so you know. Like, it's not a thing that happens for everyone. So the fact that it does, like, okay, as a side note, as you're saying that, like my podcast ranks in the most random categories. Like I was looking the other day and it's ranking like number 10 or something like that in Bhutan in personal journals. And I was like, where is Bhutan? Like, where is this place? Anyways, so it's just funny. Like you learn new places of the world as well.
Yeah, it's really cool. Very interesting. Now, so from a strategy standpoint, what we are doing specifically is I go live every single Thursday in a new episode post. Sometimes we'll throw in an additional bonus episode, but from someone just starting off, if they want to hit the ranks, is there a strategy or is there an amount of episodes that they should be doing as often as possible? Like, is it one every single day or once a week? Like, what strategy would you recommend for someone?
For sure. That's a great question. And so when I think about this question too, it's kind of like, it's the same as what you would expect on like social media, right? Like the more you post, the more you're likely to grow, the more content you have for people to consume, and the more you're able to show up in the podcast apps under the content that people are searching for, right? So when you think about your launch and you think about your launch strategy, you want to think about how many episodes you have available for people to listen to and to consume. Those are things that are also going to help you rank the charts as well. And it's super important to think about. My minimum to launch with is 3 episodes. So I always like to put the trailer out first to get people a little bit of a taste of what's to come, so they give them the chance to subscribe and like just to consume something, right? The most important period too, after when you're launching, is the first 8 weeks, because that is how your podcast will be determined, like in the charts, like how well you're doing and so on, so on, so on. So I think that piece is really important. Now, in terms of like how much content you should have and post every single week, it really depends on you. I would say that, I have clients who do biweekly and I have clients who do weekly. And then, you and I, we do like 5. There's 5 in a month, right? So you want to just think about like what actually works for your schedule and what works for you in terms of like from a production standpoint, especially if you don't have someone helping you with the editing and that kind of thing. Every podcast episode will probably average like at least 3 to 4 hours from recording, production, editing, all the social media content and all of that. So you want to factor that into your day, into your week, right? Most podcasters do 1 episode a week. I think that's a perfectly great amount. But again, depends on your goals. If you want to grow quickly and you really want to like maximize every day. You know what I mean? Like one of my favorite podcasts, it's called Make Your Damn Bed. And I love this show so much. I listen to it. I promote it like religiously. It's not even one of my clients. Like I love it so much. 5-minute episodes that she puts out every single day in the amount of time that it takes you to make your bed, So I loved this concept. I thought it was so great. And then we're seeing a huge trend towards shorter episodes, right? People don't have the time to sit. Anyways, so what I like about that is she puts out content every single day. Now, they're short episodes. It's not like you're doing a 15-minute episode every single day. So it really depends on like what actually works for you. But I would say once a week is a really great strategy. And then also pairing that with your launch strategy and maximizing those first 8 weeks from the moment you launch to the end of the 8 weeks, essentially.
Amazing. So I'm doing everything right is what you're saying.
Exactly.
But I mean, having your help definitely, like, I needed that because I am a busy entrepreneur that I have a lot going on. So I don't think if I had you, I would be able to consistently put out as much as I actually do. So thank you. Side note on that aspect. Now, you've talked about your podcast. So where can people find you? Where can people listen to your podcast?
For sure. So my podcast is called the Happiness Happens Podcast. It's a self-help podcast, has nothing to do with my business at all. It's more of a passion project than anything. And I get to talk to amazing entrepreneurs and business people and just regular people all about their journeys, what they've learned and all of that kind of stuff. You can find the Happiness Happens Podcast on any podcast platform. You can find it on my website as well, which is SimonaCostantini.com. And you can also find me on social media. And I have not yet streamlined all of my social media accounts, and I need to, because that's something that you told me to do and I didn't even think about it. But my Instagram, my main Instagram is at Simona with 2 underscores Costantini. My podcast is at Happiness Happens Podcast, and my production page is at Costantini Productions. But you can find all of those from my website or from my main Instagram page.
Amazing. And we can definitely link those below, and they will get that download of all the tech aspects. So you can find that below too. And now, you know, my ending question to every single podcast. Every entrepreneur that comes on this podcast, I always like to ask, what is your one big piece of advice for fellow entrepreneurs?
Oh my gosh. Oh, it's such a loaded question, Lisa. Oh my God. Okay. One big piece of advice for entrepreneurs. I would say enjoy the ride. It is so easy to get caught up in all of the shoulds, all of your to-do list, everything you need to do every single day. When you take a step back, and I actually did this morning, take a step back and look at all of the things that you've accomplished. Take a step back and look at all the things that you do every single day. You know, especially as an entrepreneur, you're probably working from home. You know, just the mere fact that you don't have to battle traffic in the morning, take inventory of that and feel that gratitude and just like know how far you've come and pay attention and enjoy the ride. Because what is the whole point, right? Like if you're not enjoying it every single day, what's the point of working for yourself? You know, so I just think it's so important to be aware and just know that you're already doing the best you can. And that is more than enough in every single scenario.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And like the more that you get in it, you seem to forget where you've come from, and you seem to forget all those little things, like even being able to go to the chiropractor in the middle of the day. Typically, you wouldn't be able to do that. So it's like little things like that. Just keep them forefront. I totally love that aspect and that piece of advice that you just said. Honestly, Simona, this has been fun. Thank you so much for doing this episode. And for those of you guys listening, thanks so much for tuning in to this week's episode. I am so grateful that you also get to learn from Simona. She's taught me a lot about podcasting, and we're just getting started. So be sure to share this episode, tag us on social media, let us know that you're listening, and be sure to connect with us and tell us what you love most about this episode. If you're looking to start your own podcast, feel free to reach out. Simona will definitely be helping you along the way. Thank you so much for hanging out with me on this episode. I am so grateful that you show up each and every week. I hope these tips and tricks have brought you some new ideas and new inspiration for your business. If you love this conversation, let me hear it. Leave us a rating and review on the More Than Social podcast. And be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Share it with someone who you know needs this message. And together, let's make an impact and let's make a business that we love. I'll see you next week.